Imagine waking up to the sound of thunder in the mountains, only it isn't the sky that's breaking, it's the border. Shells echo across the valleys, families flee their homes, and two nations that share history and faith stand once again on the edge of conflict. In moments like these, we must ask ourselves, what is truly being defended, the land, or the lives that live upon it? The recent exchange of artillery fire between Pakistan and Afghanistan began after reports that Afghan border forces opened unprovoked fire on several Pakistani posts situated along the western frontier. These incidents took place across multiple strategic points, including Angor-Adda, Bazour, Karam in Balochistan. According to military sources, the firing from the Afghan side started suddenly, targeting security checkpoints and patrol units stationed along the border. Pakistan responded swiftly and decisively, engaging with heavy artillery and destroying several Afghan positions believed to be responsible for the attack. The situation quickly escalated into a night-long confrontation with intense shelling reported from both sides. These clashes have been described as among the most serious border incidents between the two neighbors in recent years. The Pakistan military stated that it exercised restraint initially but was compelled to retaliate when Afghan troops continued firing. Local reports indicated that the exchange caused significant destruction to border infrastructure and military outposts. Civilians living near the frontier were forced to flee their homes amid the sound of artillery fire. Communication lines between local authorities were temporarily disrupted, and border crossings such as Torkham and Chaman were closed for safety reasons. The confrontation reflects the fragile and tense nature of Pakistan-Afghanistan relations, especially along the disputed boundary known as the Durand Line. Military analysts believe the attack may be linked to ongoing tensions regarding cross-border militant movements and Pakistan's recent warnings to Afghan authorities about infiltration attempts. This incident not only deepened mistrust between the two countries but also underscored how quickly a localized border event can spiral into a broader regional concern involving security, sovereignty, and diplomacy. The conflict between Pakistan and Afghanistan is deeply intertwined with the activities of militant groups that operate across their shared border. Pakistan has repeatedly accused Afghanistan of allowing armed organizations, particularly the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan (TTP), to use Afghan territory as a base for planning and executing attacks against Pakistani security forces and civilians. These militants, often referred to as Fitna-e-Khawarij by Pakistani officials, are blamed for numerous bombings, ambushes, and targeted killings in the country's border provinces. Pakistani intelligence reports suggest that after the Taliban regained control of Afghanistan in 2021, several TTP factions found safe haven in Afghan provinces such as Kunar, Nuristan, and Paktika, from where they regrouped and increased cross-border attacks. Islamabad insists that these sanctuaries undermine regional security and violate promises made by Kabul to prevent its territory from being used for terrorism. On the other hand, the Afghan Taliban government denies harboring such militants, claiming that it does not support any group involved in destabilizing Pakistan. Afghan officials have stated that remnants of militant networks operate independently and are difficult to control due to the mountainous terrain and weak border governance. Despite several rounds of dialogue and intelligence sharing between the two governments, no lasting mechanism for joint border management has been implemented effectively. The ongoing accusations have fueled mistrust, leading to heightened military readiness on both sides of the Durand Line. Analysts observe that militant infiltration remains a key trigger for clashes, as Pakistan often launches counter-operations or artillery strikes in response to attacks traced back to Afghan soil. The persistence of these militant safe havens has therefore become both a cause and a consequence of deteriorating bilateral relations, keeping the border region volatile and undermining efforts toward long-term peace and cooperation between the two nations. The recent border clashes between Pakistan and Afghanistan resulted in significant casualties and destruction on both sides, highlighting the grave human cost of escalating tensions. Reports from local and international media revealed that dozens of Afghan soldiers and several foreign militants were killed when Pakistan's military launched retaliatory strikes using heavy artillery against positions from which Afghan forces had allegedly initiated fire. Multiple Afghan border posts were reduced to rubble during the counterattack, which Pakistan described as a befitting response to unprovoked aggression. On the Pakistani side, official sources confirmed that at least 23 soldiers were killed and nearly 30 others sustained injuries during the exchange of fire. The intensity of the shelling forced residents in nearby villages to flee their homes, with many seeking refuge in safer areas away from the frontier. Witnesses reported the sound of artillery echoing throughout the night, and videos circulated online showed columns of smoke rising from destroyed posts along the rugged border. The scale of the damage extended beyond military losses, as civilian structures near the conflict zones were also affected by stray shells and shockwaves. Medical teams were deployed to the border regions to treat the wounded, while security forces imposed restrictions on movement to prevent further casualties. Local hospitals in Kuram and Chitral were placed on high alert to receive both military and civilian patients. International organizations expressed concern over the growing number of victims and urged both countries to exercise restraint to avoid further humanitarian suffering. The exchange of artillery fire not only devastated lives but also disrupted trade and communication along key border crossings, further straining already fragile relations. The incident illustrated how quickly armed confrontations can spiral out of control, leaving behind a trail of destruction, grief, and deepening mistrust between two neighboring nations. The clashes between Pakistan and Afghanistan were not confined to a single location but spread across several sectors of their long and porous border, amplifying the scale and complexity of the conflict. Fighting was reported in multiple regions, including Angkor-Ada in South Waziristan, Bajour, Kuram, Dir, and Chitral, as well as Baramka in Balochistan. These areas are known for their rugged terrain, limited communication networks, and sparse population, which make monitoring and controlling border activities difficult. The exchange of heavy artillery and gunfire in so many sectors at once indicated a coordinated and intense confrontation rather than an isolated skirmish. The Durand Line, which serves as the de facto border between the two countries, has long been disputed, and both sides maintain forward posts in close proximity, often within firing range. During the clashes, Pakistan reportedly used heavy weaponry to target Afghan positions accused of firing first, while Afghan forces retaliated with equal intensity. Key border crossings such as Torkham and Chuman were closed following the escalation, halting trade and travel between the two nations. This sudden shutdown disrupted the movement of goods, medical supplies, and refugees, affecting thousands of people who depend on cross-border commerce for their livelihoods. The widespread nature of the fighting also created logistical challenges for both militaries, as reinforcements and supplies had to be deployed across distant and inaccessible regions. The extent of the violence demonstrated the fragility of the Pakistan-Afghanistan frontier and how quickly tensions can ignite across multiple points. It underscored the absence of effective coordination and communication mechanisms necessary to prevent such large-scale confrontations from spreading uncontrollably. Following the intense exchanges of fire between Pakistan and Afghanistan, both sides faced growing pressure from regional actors and international organizations to de-escalate and prevent further bloodshed. In the immediate aftermath of the clashes, diplomatic channels were activated through backdoor communications, and appeals for a ceasefire were made by neighboring countries and global institutions. After several rounds of indirect negotiation, a temporary ceasefire was agreed upon to allow for the evacuation of civilians and the treatment of the wounded on both sides. This fragile truce, however, came after heavy losses and widespread damage, and there were fears it might collapse if underlying tensions were not addressed. The United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, UNAMA, and other humanitarian organizations expressed deep concern over civilian casualties and displacement caused by the shelling. Reports confirmed that several women and children were among the victims, and hundreds of people were forced to abandon their homes near the border. International bodies urged both Islamabad and Kabul to adhere to international humanitarian law and avoid targeting civilian areas. Regional powers such as China, Iran, and Turkey called for restraint, emphasizing dialogue as the only sustainable path forward. Despite these efforts, both governments continued to exchange accusations, each blaming the other for violating border integrity and harboring hostile elements. Diplomatic analysts pointed out that the absence of a permanent border management framework and the deep mistrust between the two nations have repeatedly undermined peace efforts. The ceasefire provided only a brief pause to the hostilities, with sporadic firing still reported in isolated sectors even after the agreement. Nevertheless, the diplomatic interventions reflected the international community's awareness that prolonged fighting between the two countries could destabilize the broader region, disrupt trade routes, and create new humanitarian crises across South and Central Asia. The recent clashes between Pakistan and Afghanistan have raised serious concerns regarding regional stability, sovereignty, and adherence to international law. Pakistan maintains that its actions were legitimate defensive measures taken in response to unprovoked aggression from Afghan forces and militant infiltration originating from Afghan soil. Afghanistan, however, accuses Pakistan of violating its territorial integrity and targeting its military positions without justification. Such incidents have drawn the attention of international observers and legal experts who argue that prolonged armed engagements without formal declarations of war or United Nations authorization blur the boundaries of lawful military conduct. The human cost of these hostilities has also become a pressing issue, with civilians living near the frontier bearing the brunt of the violence. According to reports from humanitarian organizations, hundreds of people have been displaced, dozens killed, and many more wounded, including women and children. Villages on both sides of the border have suffered destruction to homes, markets, and basic infrastructure, leaving families without shelter or livelihoods. The United Nations and regional alliances have called for both governments to respect international humanitarian principles and ensure the protection of non-combatants. Analysts warn that if such incidents continue, they could destabilize the wider region, inviting interference from outside powers and fueling militant recruitment in border areas. The fragile relationship between Islamabad and Kabul has reached another critical point where diplomacy, mutual restraint, and adherence to international norms are the only viable means to prevent the conflict from escalating into a larger crisis that could threaten peace across South and Central Asia. The ongoing tension between Pakistan and Afghanistan serves as a stark reminder of how fragile peace can be when borders become battlefields instead of bridges. The exchange of artillery fire, the loss of lives, and the displacement of innocent families reveal the heavy price of unresolved mistrust and the dangers of allowing violence to dictate dialogue. Both nations share deep cultural, religious, and historical ties that should unite rather than historical ties that should unite rather than historical ties that should unite rather than historical ties that should unite rather than. True strength lies not in the power of weapons, but in the courage to seek understanding, forgiveness, and cooperation. Stability in this region depends on both countries' willingness to uphold international law, respect sovereignty, and dismantle the militant networks that threaten mutual peace. The world watches not to see who wins on the battlefield, but who dares to lead with wisdom and humanity. The path forward must be paved with communication, restraint, and compassion, because lasting peace will never be achieved through fire and destruction, but through the quiet courage of those who choose reconciliation over revenge and hope over hatred.